And good afternoon, what Jamie is. I have a very special guest this morning. Jamie is
Thank
here
you
to
for
talk with
having me.
me about disability inclusion, and I'm going to introduce him briefly here. Jamie is a self described registered blind ADHD rhino. He works as a disability inclusion coordinator for AMS, an HR services firm that defines diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace as workforce dexterity. He is an outspoken disability inclusion advocate, which you can see if you follow him here on LinkedIn. In November, Jamie launched a podcast called Inclusivity, with all talk focusing on inclusivity. So, Jamie, good day to you. How are you doing today?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm doing good. I am good. It's 2 p.m. here in the not so sunny Belfast, so my day is nearly over. So I'm really good.
So that sounds great. So, Jamie, I wanted to know how you came up with your tagline, registered blind ADHD rhino. And
Yeah.
I'm just curious about that.
So yeah, there's a rhino behind me. I was going to turn around and see if I could see it. There's a rhino somewhere on this shelf. There's
Oh,
actually maybe two or three of them actually. So I struggled with my identity. So I'm registered blind since birth. So I've never known anything different. I'm also neurodivergent, and I didn't realize that until I was in my early 30s, which was only 2 years ago because I'm 32. Um, and what happened was I I struggled with saying I was disabled, and I struggled to say I'm a person with disability, not because of my own feelings, but because people were telling me off. They were saying you shouldn't say disabled person, you should say person with disability. And when you struggled with your disability your whole life, it's hard to even talk about it because we're in this like roller coaster of a journey. And I was like, I'm sick of this. I'm sick of finding this voice and saying about my lived experience and then being told, nope, that's not right. So I was like, I'm gonna take this and make it my own. So I went for registered blind ADHD rhino because rhinos are just chubby unicorns. And I read that in a book many years ago. I'm a little bit chubby. I'm not really skinny. I like my potatoes. And
me
with
too.
yeah, like I love the potatoes, but everything. But when I was younger, I got this book and it said rhinos are just chubby unicorns. And I used to write loads in it. So it was like mostly just like mushy, feely stuff like Dear Diary. It was that kind of stuff I used to write in it. And so I was like, I'm going to take this and run with it. But also, people used to ask me when I was younger, where's your unicorn? Because I was gay, they were trying to be insultive. They were trying to be funny and say, where's your unicorn? Because gay people are so sparkly and fabulous. And I used to always sarcastically say, "Oh, it's parked out the front." So in my head, I was like, "This combines a rhino, who we know is a tough animal. A tough animal can survive very harsh conditions, and as well as that, there have this really great herd mentality, almost like a community." And I was just like, "This is so cute." So I'm taking this empowerment. I'm not going to fit into no social model, and I'm going to be the registered blind ADHD rhino. That was a
I
really long-winded
love
answer.
that. Yeah, it sounds like it's just such a great, catchy tagline. And, it's true about rhinos. They are tough animals, and nobody knows not to mess with them. I mean, everybody knows not to mess with the rhino.
Yeah,
So,
like the more,
I'm just,
the more I kind of like used it. Do you know the more you kind of learn about things? Like I started like looking into rhinos. I'm now obsessed with rhinos. It's now like one of my hyper focuses. I've like rhino hats and rhino books and pens, everything. And one of the things I
yeah.
read and found out about rhinos is they can change a whole ecosystem. So if you put a rhino into an ecosystem, it would completely change it. And I kind of think that's the same about people with disabilities or disabled people. We go into workplaces. Well, what happened to me is I went into a workplace and it's opened these doors, and now I have this voice that I'm using to help make things more accessible, make things more inclusive. And I'm like, it's not an ecosystem, it's a work culture, but we have the power to change a culture or a society. So it's kind of blossomed in a way.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's great that you're bringing visibility to not just disability, but also neurodiversity. being ADHD, and then also being a gay person in society also. So how I imagine when a person first sees you, when they first meet you, I'm always curious because when people first meet me, do they see me as a woman first and then a deaf person, or is a deaf person first and then a woman?
Yeah.
So that's the
And
way for people to put you like in a box, so they know how to communicate with you
yeah,
based on that first impression,
100%.
as a
And
woman or yeah,
it's like people make these when they meet you, they have these preconceived ideas. It's like when
mhm,
people see me, they see a white man. Do you know what I mean? It's like it's almost like this privileged
mhm,
individual because I'm a white male. And then when I start to talk about my lived experiences, and they're like, "Oh wait, you're actually disabled," and it's like, "You don't look disabled." And it's like, "What do you mean? What does disability look like? How did you? What did you think I was going to look like?"
yeah,
And then it's almost like as well when I say I'm neurodivergent, it's like, well, you can't be neurodivergent. You're just a bit quirky. And it's like, what do you think neurodivergent is? Like there's this lack of education and understanding, and we get put into these boxes all the time. And when I even speak, when I tell people I'm gay, I think sometimes they can tell because I am a little bit camp. I am a little bit like, let's party, let's do that. Like I'm very out there, and I know sometimes that probably is like a little bit camp to some people, but at the same time, I'm like when people find out a little bit more of you and you strip back that away, it's like, oh wow, it's not just a white male who's privileged. It's actually someone who's been marginalized, somebody who's been discriminated, somebody who's had to really grow up in a society where it wasn't accessible, it was neurotypical, and you couldn't really be gay. Like I'm from Northern Ireland, you couldn't be gay where I was from. Like when I came out, I got in so many fights. I got beat up for it. I got threatened for it. Like really nasty things just for being gay. So I think when you look at somebody, you don't see that. It's like beneath the surface, it's like an iceberg. You only see the point, and beneath is all this going on.
yeah, yeah. The more people get to know you, they see other sides to you. And yeah, I'm just wondering, how is accessibility where you live in terms of your apartment and having access to buildings? How is it there in Belfast?
So I'm going to be on the UK. So Belfast is still part of the UK. So it's not. It's. I don't want to be mean because there's a lot of good that goes on. Companies are making commitments. We have a
Yeah.
scheme run by the government to hire disabled people and to help retain us. But when it comes to accessibility, particularly websites, we don't have any laws that say websites need to be accessible. Like in the US, they used to have laws to say this needs to be accessible. We don't have that, so companies here miss out on the accessibility part. And it's very much like a game I say of smoke and mirrors. It's like there's all these smoke screens and this amazing fancy talk. Oh, we're inclusive, we're diverse, we are, we want to hire everybody and we represent everybody. And you hear all this stuff and you're like, oh, this sounds great. But then you go into the company and there's no accessibility. They don't know what an adjustment is. They speak to you like you're less, like to be ableist, and you're almost disabled. So it's very much it's a society in the UK that is moving forward, but it's almost like two steps forward, one step back. I think in the UK, there's a lot more that needs to be done, but I'm hoping things will change. We need
Mhm.
laws.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
So it
and we
sounds
do have
like it. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that we do have one law, by the way. I feel like I've been with it. We do have the Equality Act in the UK, which says you can't
Yes.
discriminate against a disabled person, but there's no physical laws around this website needs to be accessible, things like that. So I think that's where we could go a lot better in the UK. A lot
Yeah, it could be a lot better here too. I
better.
mean, over 90% of websites here in the United States are not accessible.
Yeah,
So we still have a long way to go
yeah.
throughout the world
And
anyway.
companies are being sold a lie with accessibility. You go onto companies' websites
Yeah.
and you know straight away something's not accessible. And it doesn't matter if you have an accessibility symbol in your corner, if you have a widget or an overlay in your website and you're telling people your website's fully accessible, you're lying. And
Mhm.
you may not even know you're lying. You're being sold a lie because companies are paying memberships for these. And I'm not going to name any of these websites or overlays or widgets because I don't want us to get in trouble. But there's loads of them. And some of these widgets and overlay companies are winning awards in diversity and equity and inclusion. And it's like, does our whole industry not know what accessibility is? Because these toolbars and websites, they're an additional step. If I have to find that, that's an additional step. If you want an accessible website, it needs to be designed from the start. And then if you want to add in one of those overlays, sure, go waste your money and get one on. But it's only fixing 20 to 30% of your problems. You need a fully accessible website before putting the band-aid on.
That's definitely right. Now, so Jamie, do you have like a favorite website that you love and you really wish they were more accessible? If you could just tell them whatever you wanted, what would you tell them, first of
Oh
all?
god, every website is so bad. Like the websites is terrible, and the biggest issue for me is always color contrast. And that's actually one of the biggest failings with online websites. The color contrast is wrong, and because of my sight loss, I struggle with it really badly. So like it's like where's Wally? If somebody says it's text on a poster and I can't see it, I'm like, what? It's like where's Wally? I'm looking around for it and I'll never find it. So there's so many websites, but I think when I was younger, nobody really knew what accessibility was. So not, my mum didn't know, like my teachers didn't know. Like they knew that I was different and I needed extra support, but they couldn't tell you that was what I needed accessibility. I needed a bit more inclusive approaches to things. They couldn't have articulated that. Whereas now, so I grew up with that there and had that mentality that I couldn't speak about it and I didn't know. So I stayed silent for many years. Whereas now, I'm very much like if I encounter something that's not accessible, and it's a company website, I will tell you, and I will tell you where you need to fix it and say, I'm not a web developer. I'm just telling you from a user point of view. So I became very vocal, maybe feisty would be the right word. So, on LinkedIn, we get so many messages. Like I get my inbox blows up all the time, and it's people who want to sell me something or invite me to something or come talk at their event. And as soon as the first thing I do is look at their website, and I will come back to them and say, I can't work with you. Your website's not accessible. You don't have anything about disability or inclusion on your website. And I tell them, and if they come back and try to say, oh, we're working on it, I'm like, well, if you're having to work on it and you haven't done anything yet or have nothing on there to even acknowledge it, that's a problem. Start by acknowledge, yes, we could be better here. And that's what happens, I think. Companies get defensive. It's like, oh, we are accessible, we are inclusive. We hired a disabled person last week. It's like, yes, you've hired a disabled person, but will you retain them? I think that's where the biggest gap is. It's like people are starting to get clued into accessibility, but they see it as a trend or this like hip thing to do when actually it's part of the law. And it's actually not just about the right thing, it's a logical thing. Disabled people bring in $13 trillion globally. So that's like the global spending power of disabled people. And that rises by 14% each year. So it's like, why aren't we making our websites accessible? Why aren't we really all learning about accessibility? We're wasting out on money, we're wasting out on candidates, followers, you name it, you're missing out on it. I went into a rabbit hole there, didn't I?
Oh, that's hilarious. But no, you just touched on the really important point that companies want to hear is that people with disabilities do have a lot of money to spend, 13 trillion. So,
Yeah.
why wouldn't you want to tap into that as a company? You're really doing yourself a great disservice as a company if you're not wanting to tap into that purchasing power that disabled people have. So, really, that's a really bad move on your part as a company if you're not accessible. Your website is not even accessible. I mean, if they're contacting you to speak at an event for them, and there's no sign of inclusion or accessibility
Yeah.
on the website, it makes me wonder if they're wanting to like have you speak and help them
Yeah.
on how to make their website accessible. Maybe is that what they wanting to do, but they
No,
don't tell you?
typically when they reach out, it's like, oh, so like I work within the disability realm, so I do, and there's a
Mhm.
lot of different companies doing a lot of different things. And I'm a firm believer, and this is maybe me being really harsh, but I'm a firm believer that if you're in the space of disability inclusion,
Mhm.
you need to know about accessibility. Accessibility needs to be the core of your business because
Yeah.
it impacts us all in so many different ways. And most of these companies are reaching out looking maybe do me to be an ambassador. And I don't ambassador with companies who aren't accessible. Even if they're willing to work with me, I can't put my name to that until you're accessible. And it's probably a bit maybe a bit snobby of me to be saying that, but I'm very much like if I can't engage with it, I know that frustration all too well. I don't want to be sitting there promoting something that I know somebody in my network or one of my friends or colleagues is going to say, why would you get behind that when you know how this feels to be trying to interact? So it's all different things, and like people trying to sell their services or provide adjustments or saying, can you test out this website for me? And like I will test a website, I will use it from a user point of view, and I'll bill the person. I'm like, here's my bill, thank you for paying for my skills and time. But at the same time, if it's like a friend or a colleague or like a charity or something, I do all that. I'll give them loads of pointers for free, but I'm not a website developer, so I always have to say, go to my friend Kat. I've got a discount for her. Go to her; she'll get you an accessible website. It's
That's
yeah,
great.
my inbox scares me.
Yeah. Yeah. See how it's so frustrating, you know. But then it's great that you also help charities that usually don't have that much money to spend and help them out for free. And I think that's great. I wish more people did that, but I
I
don't
think
think they do. So,
people lose that. I think like I followed some really big names on LinkedIn. Like when I joined LinkedIn, so I've been LinkedIn for about 3.5 years. The first year and a half, I kind of didn't do anything apart from go look for candidates because I worked in recruitment. I was trying to find candidates with my snazzy LinkedIn license. And I started finding people who were talking about disability and neurodiversity. And it was like, oh my goodness, the first time I encountered people who were empowered, who were uplifted and really just put themselves out there really authentically. And I had not spoken about my disability. I hadn't accepted I was disabled until 3 years ago. Like I struggled with it really badly. And you can't really run away from being registered blind. Like it's always there. And I would get so frustrated and my mind would go and I would get so angry at myself, which I've obviously now realized is because I'm neurodivergent. My brain is just wired a little bit differently. So I pretty much just struggled and navigated on. So finding my voice and kind of being able to say, no to this or this isn't accessible is was it was empowering, but I learned it through these people I started connecting with. And I was like, I want to do that. I want to start doing that. So that's what made me create content. But also, as I kind of built my audience, I watched these people really build their audiences and was like, this is amazing. We have representation. And then I can remember reaching out to one of these people and saying, hey, listen, we're doing a session with our ERG, which is Employee Resource Group. And it was our neurodiversity group. And the person got back to me and said, yes, here's my bill. It's $2,000. And I was like, oh, £2,000. So that's sterling in British pounds. And I was like, this is just a small group of people who are neurodivergent. It's not to do a whole company talk. It's a small group of people with lived experience. And then the person came back and says, I charge by each follower I have. And at the time, the person had like 170,000 followers. And I was like, wow, so your community, you're actually using that as your base to work out your base rate. So it was all very confusing to me. And then I had asked the same person a couple of months later to get involved with a charity. And they wanted the charity to pay a lot of money. And it was it's a charity. I was like, what are you doing? So I think what happens is people obviously have to get paid for the time and expertise 100%, but I think sometimes people forget the roots that they've came from as they kind of grow, and I'm really keen that I never do that. I would never want to say to a company who's maybe getting by or trying to do the right thing, I will give them my time. Like I have clients in my books. I do some of my self-employed work at the side, and I have clients in my book who are small charities who I'm charging like $200 for maybe hours and hours of work, and I'm sitting going, I wouldn't do this for a large company, but I'm like, I know where I came from, and I know that struggle, and I know that when you do have lived experience of disability or neurodivergence, you're already disabled by society. Why aren't we helping each other that little bit more, giving each other that little bit more empathy or that understanding?
hmm exactly, exactly. Having that empathy too, if you're
Mhm.
not a disabled person, and then trying to understand where we're coming from and the frustrations that we deal with every single day. I mean, every single day, as a deaf person, me as a deaf person trying to communicate with people in public, and then everybody talks differently. And
Yeah.
so it's different kind of a barrier. And so I'm just wondering, you said something that stood out to me right now to me is that you didn't feel comfortable calling yourself disabled until about 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I
So,
my my language with disability is like this roller coaster. Like there's day like I'm comfortable now to say I'm a disabled person because I see saying that as it's not me this problem. it's this inaccessible computer, it's this inaccessible workplace, it's this ableist
Mhm.
attitude. These different things or behaviors or things around me that are affecting me or disabling me. But equally, there's days that I say I'm disabled and I'm like, I didn't like that. That didn't feel right to me. And then I'll say I'm a person with disability. And then I'll say that for a while and I'll be like, wait, this isn't right. So it's like we go round in this almost like a carousel, going round in circles, basically going, is this right? Is this not right? And I think that just this big focus within the disabled community is like what language we use. And we have people who aren't disabled saying, well, you should be saying not differently abled, or you should be saying X, Y, Z. And it's like, why are we focusing all this attention on what to call a person's lived experience when really the question should be is what are we doing to make this more inclusive, more accessible for users? How are we creating spaces that are accessible and safe for people to have these conversations? Because right now, all we're doing is fighting online about, oh, you should say this, you shouldn't say that. And I think it's so ableist. It's one of the most ableist things as a personal lived experience to hear another personal lived experience say to you, you can't say that. You've invalidated that person's lived experience. Words have power and it evolves and language evolves. And I think that we, as people, we're constantly evolving and learning. So I think it's so important that we move away from the language and it's like, let an individual identify. Like, I'm a rhino. If anybody wants to dispute it, let's do it. But you're not going to be quoting me. You should follow the social model. You should follow this model. I'm not about that. I'm like, let everyone be who they want to be.
Yeah, I'm really done with that too, Jamie. I'm sick of people saying, oh, you should call yourself this and that, and the whole differently abled. What the hell
Oh,
does that mean? I
where
hate
does it
that
come
so
from? Like,
much.
do people just sit and pull names out of hats and be like, let's try this today? Like, I had one and it was a workplace and they didn't use the word disability or disabled. It was superstars. We have superstar colleagues. And I was like, what does that mean? Like, where do you get these names from? It's like it's
Oh my
pulled out of a hat and they sit around and say, yes, let's use this. But if you went and spoke to a disabled person or a person with disability or a rhino, whatever you're calling yourself, it's like, just call me this or call me by my name. Let's just use my name. It's what if we moved away from having to worry about labels and we actually just worried about creating an equal, equitable environment or experience? So we didn't care about what way a person identified. We had an inclusive, universal design experience for everybody. It's like there's so much energy wasted in language, I think, when I'm like, just, let's fix this instead, please.
Yeah, I mean, it's a personal choice. You call
Mhm.
yourself whatever you want.
Yeah.
Okay, I was part of the deaf community in college, and even in college, they're horrible. I mean, we're
Oh,
all ever heard of hearing. They're horrible. And they said, I said I was deaf. I am
mm,
deaf.
mm.
Medically, I am deaf. I have to show, if I have to show you my audiogram, go ahead. You can check out my audiogram. I,
I've got a certificate that says I'm registered blind. I'm the same. I'm like, do you want to see my certificate? I've got it. I'll show you.
yeah. And so they say, oh, you talk. So you must want to be hearing. I said, no, I was raised to speak. And that's what my parents, that's how they raised me. And they learned some sign language, but really, we only spoke in the house. I didn't learn sign language until I went to college. And here I am, I'm learning sign language. I picked it up very quickly. And I have these other deaf people tell me, oh, you just want to be hearing, oh, you're this and that. They're not really deaf. I said, I am deaf. I know what I am. So the only thing you can do is just stay away from those kind of
Yeah.
people who want to tell you differently, who want to tell you you're not this and that, when you already know you're deaf or blind, whatever.
Yeah.
So,
It sets you back because it really does. It sets you back. Like, I think people
yeah.
forget, and I think within the community, because it's not just one disabled community or one disability community, couldn't speak there.
Mhm.
It's communities within communities. It's groups with shared experiences, groups where similar experiences, people who completely disagree. There's so many. There's just so many different groups and intersectionalities within disability itself, and it's like people sometimes forget what it takes, the journey that it takes somebody with disability. Like my disability, I went up and down my mental health. I had depression, I had anxiety, I didn't leave the house, I had no friends, I was bullied. all these trauma, we have traumas and we have faced microaggressions, and to get to a point where you feel confident even to say this out loud, people forget what it takes to get to that point. That is like a moment that each time you do it, you forget how empowering it is. But that's what empowerment is living your truth, is being your authentic self. And for anybody to come in and say you shouldn't say that or undermine what your experience, absolute
Mm-hmm.
shame on them, because they should remember themselves what it took to get to that part. And yes, we can talk about privilege. Some people have more disabling experiences than others. Some of their lived experience may impact them more than others, but that's privilege. If you don't have to go through that journey, that's a privilege that you haven't had to went through that journey. Everybody is entitled to a lived experience, and to try to chip away at them, you're setting that person back. I know when people with sight loss who I went to school with told me, "Oh, I shouldn't say that I'm visually impaired," I would be like, "What do you mean? Why do I have to say I have sight loss? I like visually impaired." And it very much has set me back. And for years, I struggled with it. And even now, you still have past traumas that impact you. I'll say visually impaired, and I'll be like, in the back of my head, I'll think of those people from school. And it's like, this is so triggering. And we're on this journey. Just let the person have the journey. Don't ever intrude in that journey. Listen with intent. Identify with that person how they want to be identified. And equally, even if you don't identify that way, respect that other person's and use theirs. Like, it's all about respect. It's a two-way street.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Just respect the other person's experience. Don't say it's something else when you haven't had the personal experience exactly. So I want to say hi to some people here. Andrew Bennett is here this morning. Says good morning, YouTube, from Andrew Bennett. Thank you for being here, Andrew. And then Dave Buck says good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here, Dave. It's good to see you. And
Morning.
Krista. Good morning to you, Krista. Hi, Jamie and Juana from Krista Marion.
Hi.
Good to see you, Krista. I hope you guys are learning something from both of our experiences. And Jamie, I wanted to, you probably, we've talked about this a little bit already, but how did you get to your current job as a disability inclusion coordinator?
So I had more jobs and hot dinners in my 20s. And the longest I ever held down a job was maybe like a year, maybe a year and a half. And in employment, it was companies talk the talk. And then when I get in there, they weren't accessible, or I'd wait months for accommodation. So I just ended up having to leave, or I would get sacked for taking time off work because I would have back pains from using computers that weren't big enough or not having my screen readers. So I really just bounced around like a ping pong ball in the job market. And I had hit rock bottom and had left a really big employer within the UK. Like, you can't, just a really big employer who should have known better. And they had basically treated me really badly with my disability. They had mocked it, belittled me, questioned my skill and ability, and spoke to me like a child, which was probably the most infuriating part. But I put up with it for a year and a half. And after a year and a half, I snapped. It was like, I can't do this no more. And it was my breaking point. And honestly, I think if I didn't have my partner, I don't know what would have happened. Like, I probably would have spiraled really badly. But a friend had posted online saying, my company's hiring. And I thought it was a call center. And I was like, well, I've worked in call centers. It'll be a job for a while. It'll get me through it. It'll get me money for Christmas. So I went into the job and realized it was recruitment. And within that space, they were very open in the sense that they said to me, it was like, what can we do to support you? And when you've never heard that as a disabled person and in your late 20s, it was like almost like the world stopped and stood still. It was like, what do you want to help me? And they got me adjustments, and there was a few problems with getting adjustments in, but rather than kind of say, well, we can't help you, they got me different types of adjustments to try. They gave me paid time off. They really worked with me and actually got me some counselling and support and all to get me through the process. And it was the first time in my life where I felt, wow, that this is what it feels like to belong somewhere. And because I had kind of started speaking out about, well, this isn't accessible and this isn't accessible, the company I worked for made me the Global Disability Employee Resource Group lead. And essentially, it was helping drive disability inclusion across the organization. And I was in that role for like nearly nearly a year, I think. But I was doing my day job alongside it, so I was still recruiting. I was still working with candidates, By the way, the company's AMS. So anyone who's wondering where did he work, it's AMS. And essentially, with that, there, I don't know if I impressed them or if it was that I kind of was saying, I love what I do in recruitment, but I want to focus on the company side. I want to make things inclusive internally. I want to make recruitment processes accessible. I don't want to be speaking to the candidates. I love it, but I want to be making it more inclusive. And I got hired into the role last summer as disability inclusion coordinator. It was a brand new role. We'd never had one before. And I've been promoted since. So I got promoted there last month. I'm now principal disability accessibility ERG lead. Really long-winded title. And essentially, it's really just being that voice that's honest to AMS at times and saying this isn't going to work, that's not accessible, or we need to look at the XYZ. Because I think when organizations have been going for so long and they haven't really had that knowledge of accessibility and inclusion, I think having that voice of lived experience really makes a difference. And I think that's probably where the values came into my role. So now I'm helping AMS, I help lead our ERG or neurodiversity ERG as well. And I actually advise our clients on their own accessibility. And we are 12,000 colleagues across the globe. We operate in every region. We have over 100 blue chip clients, some of the biggest names in the markets within all different sectors. So it's like we're outsourced recruitment. And I think because of that, I don't even know how to explain it. It was like I found my voice through LinkedIn, but because of AMS, I was on LinkedIn. So they very much listened and made me feel like I belonged. And because I felt like I belonged, I sung like a bird. And ever since then, I've just been doing all the disability work. And not just me, the colleagues, like I've really amazing colleagues who are also disabled to step forward and bravely share their lived experiences, especially when there's regions of the world that we work in where it's maybe not as recognised, disability or neurodiversity. So it's been just the most amazing career the past 2 years. And I keep saying to my partner, I feel like I need to pinch myself because when I think of what I went through before, like I never knew what belonging was. I thought it was a buzzword. I was discriminated. I've been in tribunals. I've been sacked more times than I cared to remount. And people would look at my CV and say, nope, don't give him a chance. But AMS did. And then when they found out the reason for my CV being so gappy, they made sure that I stayed and they retained me. So, yeah, I get a bit emotional talking about that because I think about AMS, I don't know where I would have ended up.
Yeah, I think that's amazing that this just happened to hear about this job with AMS and you thought it was a job at a call center when it was really in recruitment. So that was interesting. So I'm so glad that you found your place in the workplace. So I
And it's
think
so
that's
funny
wonderful.
because it's in the one place I kind of had the most anger for because we know as disabled people we don't get the opportunities. As soon as we mention adjustments, I would get rejected. We get rejected. We get told, or the tone of voice changes on the phone, or the communication style changes, and it's these little small microaggressions that I'd experienced. But it was like for the first time ever, it was like, wow, you don't shine away. And I told them about my eyesight, and they kind of said, do you need glasses? Do glasses help you in work? And I was like, no. And they didn't bat an eyelid. Whereas usually when people say, can you wear glasses? And I say no, they're like, well, then how can you have bad eyesight? It's like, glasses don't help me. My eyesight's too bad. Hi. So it was just, it was empowering. It was empowering.
Yeah. Yeah, sounds like it. And for all the hard stuff that was happening before you started working with AMF, it kind of helps you appreciate more what you have now because of your
Oh,
struggles previously. Yeah. So
like it's,
Krista, Krista says, this is valuable because I am sure we are all just ignorant about how to make differently abled people feel included. So, Krista, we were just talking about this earlier about the term differently abled, and we understand the intent is to be inclusive. Like I know where you're coming from, but it's very personal what each person wants to be called. Like I just say I'm a deaf person. Maybe somebody else would say I'm hearing impaired, which is not really a term that we use anymore. But if someone wants to call themselves hearing impaired, that's fine. Just go with that. And Jamie calls himself a blind person. registered blind ADHD rhino. No, not to call him that,
And like
but
that's it. It's
so
not bad. I think we try to sometimes. I
yeah,
think we try to soften the blow with disability and disabled because I think these words carry weight. People already, but as soon as you hear the word disability or disabled, your mind goes, and everybody's mind does. We're so conditioned by society to see disability as one thing because the global sign for disability is a wheelchair user, when only 8% of disabled people are wheelchair users. So we're missing out on a whole 97%. And I think because of the weight of the word disabled disability, we as a society have started to almost sugarcoat it or lighten the load when we say it. So like words like differently abled, I'm an advocate if you're a person with lived experience, use that word, and I will use that to identify with you. But I think when we're talking about disabled and disability, I think we need to say the word because it's not a dirty word. And I think what we need to do is we need to take the power back into the words. You know, the word queer in the LGBTQ plus community, people used to shy away from that. People used to hate that. I got called that in school, and even saying it, my skin crawls. However, it's now a word that people use to identify. It's became a word of empowerment, and I think that's what we need to do with disability and disabled. We need to put the power back into it. It's okay to say it. Like if somebody tells you to call them disabled, please do. But we're talking about disability and disabled. Say it, disabled person with disability. Let's give it power. I went to that wee rabbit hole
yeah,
there. But it is, Chris was
yeah,
right. It's about learning. Like sometimes you need that person with lived experience. You need those colleagues with lived experience to talk to you and to
mhm,
let you know. And I think this is why it's so important if you are in a business, advocate to have an employee resource group what focuses on disability. It's a community of people with lived experience, friends, family, allies who come together within work to help really talk about these issues. And I think it's so overlooked in a lot of businesses. So yeah, so you do need to lived experience is the best experience.
that's true. That's true. And then Andrew Bennett says, "That's awesome, Jamie. Did the company create that diversity, equity, inclusion role because of the efforts you had been making internally?" She's
um,
referring to when you started working with AMS.
yeah, so I think when I was doing my recruiting role, so I was sourcing candidates and sourcing for anyone who doesn't know, it's a bit like headhunting. It's like messaging people on LinkedIn, being like, "Hey, we've got a job for you." But it's very much like sales meets marketing. Like there's a whole load of skills go into it, and I loved it. There's a lot of technology involved and things like that to find candidates, so I love that side of it. But the ERG work, so leading this global disability group, it was like I came alive in the workplace. I felt like I was making a difference. I could see the difference. You know, we started making videos of colleagues sharing lived experiences of their disability, and we started putting that into our own training platforms. And you just the small changes that we were seeing, I felt so happy at work. And then I would go back to my recruiter job, which I loved, but I was feeling this like battle, like I was on a scale. And I spoke to my manager at the time, Becca. She was just an absolute godsend because we also had a conversation around me being neurodivergent because at this time I was like, hey, right, I need to identify like this. But we spoke about where was I headed because obviously I love recruitment, but I didn't want to be speaking to candidates or doing the recruitment side. I wanted to be in the side where had the impact on the culture shift, the internal organization, and she helped me kind of say to AMS, I said, this is where I want to be. You know, if this role comes up, I'd really like to take it. And AMS were kind of like, yes, let us talk about this. But obviously, I'm neurodivergent, I have no patience. I did a post on LinkedIn and was like, hey, everybody, does anybody have any roles coming up around disability or within DEI? And AMS came back to me and was like, what are you doing? We have a role for you. Stop, take that down. So I took it down and put me into the role. And then I think it was the impact I made. Like we went from being an organization who were pretty much talking a talk, and now we're walking and walk. We're not there yet because there's no final destination. It's a long way off, but we're on the roadmap and we've got buy-in. And I think that's the most important part is recognizing that you're never going to be at the end point of disability inclusion or being fully accessible. Things change. Just acknowledging where you are and how do you get to level 2 or how do you get to level 3. That was a long-winded answer.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. I take everybody down rabbit holes of ADHD. I'm so sorry.
I hope that answers your question, Andrew. Thank you for that question. That was a good one. No. Okay. So, is this where workforce dexterity comes in?
Yeah,
Jamie, is having that flexibility.
yeah. So workforce dexterity is it's built off four pillars. So AMS have four pillars, what they believe really helps make us stand out and kind of be a global leader in recruitment, RPO, which essentially is outsourced recruitment. And the four pillars are, hopefully I get these right, I really shouldn't. So you have fluid, so it's around being fluid, making sure that we can adapt to any situation, we are getting ahead with technology, our people have the skills. And then you have resilience, so obviously resilient, being resilient to change. Then we also have diversity, so having a truly diverse workforce, recognizing what the skills are, recognizing what the shortages are in the market, and helping plug back into that market. And then the last one, fluid, resilient. I can't remember the last one off the top of my head. There is another one. Let me just double check over here. Differentiate. There we go. I have it written down on my desk, by the way. Differentiate is it's about not doing it like a that's just being bold, is being passionate, is being authentic in your approach, and that's actually our value. So it's about an organization going beyond talking this talk. It's going above and beyond. It's being ahead of the game. It's not just being a client of yours, it's being a partner. It's not just hiring diverse people because it's the right thing to do. It's about hiring diverse people from different backgrounds, from different regions, putting them together to work and learn because we all know diverse workforces thrive and are more productive. So it's AMS to me is like I describe it to my friends in Belfast. It's what I imagine Google. When you think of Google, like you think of slides. It's not like I don't know. Like in my head, that's what Google is like to work with. It's slides and there's sweets in the canteen and everybody's happy and it's this amazing place to work. I've never worked at Google, so I don't know if that's true. But that's what I describe it to my friends at home. It's like it was this environment that belonging wasn't just a buzzword. Where the values weren't just words and paper. It was things that people lived and breathed. When you speak to somebody who works at AMS, their eyes almost sparkle because they feel that belonging, they feel that they make a difference, and you get opportunities to learn, you get opportunities to upskill, and it's not just a work, it's about a work life balance. I can't even explain it. It's like you're an AMSer, and if people leave, they usually boomerang back because it's just this really treasured place to work, and I feel really lucky I got into it. So if you can work for AMS and you're in recruitment, get into it. It changed my whole life, and honestly, it's been the probably the smartest decision I ever made to apply for that job.
Yeah, that's fabulous. So somebody says Krista says this is part of the problem is not knowing,
Oh, 100%, Chris.
knowing
100%.
how.
And that's it's there's a lack of education in society. We still segregate in education. We still segregate young disabled people in schools. Not every education system is making them included and bringing them into our class. And I appreciate not every young person with disability needs that, but we're still continue to segregate. So our children now are still growing up with the feeling that we need, disabled people need to be off the side, or we can't work with them. But I think once we kind of shift that society where we are having that really truly inclusive experience where it's equitable, so everybody has the support that they need, and it's actually equal, so we actually are all equal to each other. I think that's what the difference will be, and we'll see people grow up being more inclusive. But I think at the moment, it's about very much it's a lot of self-learning. I think follow people with disability, follow people sharing tips, get involved with your employee resource groups if you have them, get involved with volunteering for a disability charity, even take some of the LinkedIn learning courses. There's some LinkedIn learning courses out there. The more the better. But obviously nobody's expecting to be an expert. If you don't know, just ask. It's okay not to know as well. And I think that's the biggest lesson I give to anybody who's not disabled is don't tiptoe around just because we're disabled. Ask us. We're not going to get offended because you asked, oh, what is it better to say this or that? It's more offensive if you're saying you don't look disabled. Like, don't say that ever.
Yeah, that's way more offensive if you just call us what you feel like calling us. And I always appreciate when people ask me, "Oh, do you read lips?" Even if it's they assume that all deaf people read lips, fine. But if you ask me, "Do you read lips?" I'll tell you. I won't be offended by it. Or how much can you hear? They see me wearing hearing aids, things like that. I'm not offended.
I get
So
asked all the time, "Where's my guide dog?" I'm like, I have the opposite of a guide dog. I have like two dogs that are like this size, they're tiny, and they trip me up all the time. And it's like, I don't have a guide dog, I have trip dogs. It's great. Like, I think it's
someone asked, um, LinkedIn user asked, I don't know who this person is, the struggle of doing two jobs when you do employee resource groups work, etc., especially when disabled, is the fast track to burnout. When the employee resource group and diversity work isn't perceived as proper work.
yeah,
That's
it's
true.
a it's a challenge. Like, I get really tired at work quite easily, like on a computer, like my eyes. So the proper medical condition for my disability is ocular albinism with nystagmus, which essentially means I'm the same as an albino, only I have the pigmentation. So I've got my dark hair. If you take a photo of me, you can tell I have the albino in my eye because my eyes go almost red. And then as well as that, the nystagmus means my eyes go for little walks. So my eyes are constantly shaking or struggling to focus on things, and that gives me migraines. It makes me tired, and it makes me really cranky because then my neurodivergence kicks in, and it's like I'm just my SD sometimes kicks in too, and I'm like, don't speak to me. But when you put yourself in a job that is really, really demanding, recruitment is really demanding. There's no point saying it's not. Most jobs are really demanding at the moment. Everybody is doing double the workload in nearly every position I know, not just in recruitment, across the world. And when you think about burnout and disabled people, we get burnt out so easy. Somebody's neurodivergent gets burnout. It's part of their behaviors and traits is that they do have burnout and they have to put in coping strategies. So for me, I got burnt out so much. Like I would have shouted at my like not shouted at my manager, but I would be going to my manager, like, I can't do this no more. I'm gonna drop out of the ERG, or I'm gonna drop this. I can't be doing this. But my managers were actually really good. They're like, "Do you know what? Let's lighten some of your workload," because I think it was, and I know not every organization is the same, but AMS, I think they realized what the impact was to me and the impact it was making to organizations. So I think they realized the value there. But I think what organizations all need to do better is they need to give more time to these roles. Dedicate. If you're an ERG lead, you should have a day dedicated a week, if not a wee bit more, a day dedicated each week to focus on this here. You should be able to get upskilling in it. You should be able to get recognition for it. Your managers should be aware of what you're doing, because it's okay to be in the RG league, but you need your colleagues around you to understand why you're so busy or why you can't do X, Y, Z, because that burnout will happen when you're doing it on top of it. And it happened to me many times, but I was lucky because, as I said, AMS, my manager, Paul, was just kind of like, well, what can we do to support you here? Why don't we try to reduce some of your workload? And that's what they did. They put me into a team where my workload wasn't as busy, and it really did make a difference. But yeah, companies listening, give a dedicated day to a week to your ERG leads at least. I
That's
hope that
complete.
answered and I didn't ramble.
If you could tell us who you are, LinkedIn user, that would be great. And Krista says, she says that someone who is blind asked me here on LinkedIn to call them differently abled. Yeah, see, that's
Fabulous.
okay. If they
Yeah,
say
that's
call me
100%.
differently abled, yeah, then that's okay. But in
Is that-
general terms, if you're just speaking about disabled people, just call them disabled or people with disabilities. If you're
And this is
talking
one,
in general terms,
and a
yeah.
good one thing you'll find is there's so much language with disability. Like if I look at the UK, so we in the UK are very much leading towards a social model of disability, which is using identity first language. So it's disabled person, and it's putting the recognition that society disables us. That's when my business name comes in, my side hustle, Disabled by Society. Shameless plug. But as well as that, you then also have the medical model, which is person with disability. It's about the disability, the impairment, the condition. And I think that it's hard to know which one is right or wrong. But in the UK, we lean towards disabled person social model, whereas in the US, they lean towards still very much the medical model as person with disability. However, if you look at some countries in EMEA, so like in Germany and I believe France, they still use the word handicapped, which we don't say at all in the UK. Like in the UK, even saying that word will get you in trouble. And I know in the US, there's parts of the US that people still identify with it as well. So it's the language, and this is why I always get back to is this: there's so much time spent in this language, but there's so much options, a variety out there. There's no right or wrong answer. I think if you're a non-disabled person, always take your lead from what that individual disabled person or person with disability or whatever different able, whatever they want to identify, use their terminology. But when it comes to large groups, people with disabilities, disabled people, depending on your region, of course, always look into your own regions and the laws and things like that. But yeah, respect the individual's identity. But you're just right. You did exactly right then. You use different abled. I'm rambling because I have ADHD again. It's my filter won't stop.
I'll let
Down a
you
rabbit hole.
I'll let you ramble. That's fine. No problem. Krista says we need more conversations like these. Yes, we definitely do. I think I'm going to have more guests on to talk about disability inclusion. It seems like there's still a great need to know what to call us individually. So it's just about asking you
It's that
or
individuals.
whatever. I mean, it's better than
Yeah,
assume always. So
that's it. Always
link,
ask. If you don't know, just ask.
yeah. So LinkedIn users says, I think everyone is at a different stage of diagnosis or disability or internalized ableism acceptance. If an individual identifies as differently abled, I explain I'm disabled. But like pronouns, I respect your own terms. I wouldn't use words like superstar. I wouldn't
Superstar
say
or
that's terrible.
superpower. Like I'm like, if I had to choose a superpower, would it really be to have godly eyesight? Because surely you'd want like X-ray vision. I'm like, the super words. I get the whole super narrative for young people who are disabled who maybe struggling to find that confidence. So I understand it being used in that context, but when I left special education, which I even hate that word, I had accessible, inclusive education. I quickly
Yeah,
ran away from that super idea. But you're just right. And I think there is this thing about internalized ableism where we grew up in a society that many of us have been told that we're less than, that you are not able to get a job, you can't have a career, you can't do X, Y, Z because of your lived experience. So that internalized ableism, it really does, it affects you. You believe those words, you believe that you're less, that you deserve this because of your disability, that you shouldn't fit in because of your disability. This ableism is ingrained in media, in movies. There's no representation. We could get, this is such a broad topic, but there's so much that contributes us feeling like we are less than, and that internalized ableism, it just flourishes. And I always say it's like a spider web. A person gets trapped in this web of internalized ableism and they can't escape it. And the web doesn't get less. It doesn't. You can't just unravel from it. It just gets added to and added to and added to, until eventually that person either just says, "I've had enough of this," and they suddenly find or listen or find a way out of it, or they just stay buried in it and then they project it onto others. And I think that's what the biggest problem is that internalized ableism. There's not enough support out there for people for it. People go through really traumatic experiences because of disability, and I think you almost need a support group or community to get behind you and support you. That's what my LinkedIn community did for me, and I don't know if they know that, but like they really did. Like a lot of what I was posting on LinkedIn was my own kind of ramblings, my own kind of passionate rants, my own like, I need to get this out in paper. And people responded and engaged. And I think that's what people can connect with now. These conversations need to happen because I think for the first time ever, people with disabilities or disabled people were in a position to actually just say the authentic truth. It's like there's no holding back now. Why would we? D&I has been absolutely sprung forward. And it's sad the way it has been sprung forward because obviously D&I has been advanced because of the murder of George Floyd. But D&I is now in the spotlight, accessibility is now in the spotlight. People have to talk about these issues because it's affecting us. And I now like these authentic stories and voices is what is probably going to change society moving forward. And technology. Have you seen the AI at the moment? Like, it's insane. Like, I can't hope.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't think we need to worry about AI as much as we need to worry about being more accessible and inclusive. I
Yeah.
think we need to focus on that more.
Yeah,
So, and
AI can actually help a lot. Like they've now created, like I seen this post earlier where this chat GPT, like I don't know if you've heard about this, like everybody on LinkedIn talks about chat GPT, but chat
mhm,
GPT 4
yeah,
can actually now be used to write image descriptions, like really good image descriptions. It can be used to help translate the alt text image description. Like I was reading this earlier. I will send you the link so you can share, but honestly, it's
oh yes,
technology
please do.
is helping us navigate the world.
Yes, I was reading about that, Jamie, that a woman somewhere in the UK, a blind woman somewhere in the UK, is using ChatGPT to navigate, to tell
Yeah.
her what's inside of her refrigerator,
Yeah.
and when she's out and about, what's going on when she's out and about, something like that. I haven't read the whole article, but
Yeah. It's
please do
it's
send me
like
the link.
we
That
used
would
to have this app
I,
called Be My. There's an app called Be My Eyes where you actually have like a virtual assistant talk, like somebody
yes,
who's actually
yes.
real talk with you, and this is going to eradicate needing that. Like it would be a game changer because there's even glasses now that like somebody comes into a room and it will tell you who that person is from the photo. If you're reading a bit of paper, it'll
Oh,
translate the book. Technology and disability, I think there's this really beautiful intersection that's going to happen over the next couple of months or years, and it's going to really help propel disabled people in the workplace, but also give them empowerment at home and in situations we would never have had it. And I think it's going to make a difference because organizations know they need to invest in technology. And I think when they start investing that, this intersection is going to really help.
definitely,
The future's
definitely.
AI.
Yeah, that's just and it's gonna get better. I know that. So I know that's one way that Chat GPT is helping blind people. So that's a great move on their part. Andrew says, speaking of disability inclusion, some new Lego sets include figures with visible disabilities, hearing aids, missing hand, missing foot, wheelchair, etc. I didn't know that, Andrew. That's really interesting. I think
Oh,
that's, yeah.
these are amazing. So I seen this the other week. Although there was there was a headline run when they did this, and it was just like, has Lego became woke? And I do woke in inverted commas because it was like they're creating
Mhm.
representation. Is this not what we've fought for years to see? That your child with a disability, or your brother, or your sister, or your cousin, whatever it is seeing themselves represented in toys. I grew up thinking that blind was Daredevil, like Daredevil the movie. That's what I thought a blind person was. But Daredevil was fully blind. I still have sight, so it didn't represent me. And I think we missed this representation. And I think there's companies out there at the moment doing incredible things like Lego, what they've just done. You have C-suite leaders, which I can't remember the lady's name off the top of my head, but they put disability representation in movies. And like I just think that this is what we need. We need that real representation, and Lego's done a massive jump forward for it. To go Lego. I love Lego.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that too. And
Although,
I
to be fair, they did make a mistake last year, though. Last year, Lego did do a Lego advertisement, which was an astronaut, and it says, I am autistic astronaut, but they stroked out the word autistic and just left astronaut, and they marketed it. And obviously, there was a bit of fury because it's like, we can't hide that we're autistic. You can't, that's the piece, that's the way I think. You can't just take it away from me. And it was almost like bringing a bit of shame to the word. So they had a
yeah.
boo boo last year. So I think this has really helped them this year.
Oh, I didn't know about that. I
Oh,
did not know about that.
I do
I
not
should
sit in
look that up.
sanity and Google thing. I Google just disability and inclusion and see what comes up in the news and be like, oh, I didn't know this.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I should have a Google alert for stuff like that. That's true.
Or LinkedIn.
I
LinkedIn's
think
brilliant for it. I find out everything through LinkedIn feeds.
yeah, I should be doing that. What am I doing? So James Patron says, this is a subject that is very near and dear to me. Abilities and inclusion go hand in hand. That's true, James. Yeah, maybe you should be a guest on my show, James, so we can talk about accessibility and inclusion with you too. So we should have a chat about that after this live. And James also says the definition of disability is someone who points a finger at, makes fun of, and torments others who have an ability.
um,
Hmm.
that's a unique, like that's a very good perspective. to look at. I'm gonna be honest. I wouldn't agree. I
Yeah.
wouldn't agree with that only because I personally, I don't shy. I think that I don't like to shy away from the words because for me, disability. I have had a disability. I've had a disadvantage in my life because my eyes haven't worked. I'm also disabled because society disables
Mhm.
me. But I think it's such a unique way to look at it, and I love when people are able to. It's like a metaphor. I love metaphor. I'm really cheesy. Any metaphors, mottos, things like that. But for me, I'm like, it's not a dirty word. I could never use anything else to explain it because to me that's what ableism, and that definition is ableism, is people who treat people who are disabled as less, as people with stereotypes and misconceptions, or treat disabled people less favorably. That's what ableism is, or disableism.
Yeah, yeah.
But I did like it. Like,
It's,
you know.
yeah, I like that. How you explain that, James. We should really talk about that.
And it's like, do you know what? It's really good. I think, and it really reinforces what we were just talking about. Everybody has this individual way of identifying with their lived experiences, and I think it's so important that we give platform to that. Because no, I'm not right sitting here. Everything I say today is not right. Like, don't take me at my word. This is my lived experience, and I'm only an expert in my lived experience. Somebody else is an expert in theirs, and I think this is important of having a table with many voices at it.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. And James says, check this organization out, bestbuddies.org. Okay, I'll check that out.
I'm gonna have to come
I
back
will
and get
see what
that.
that's about. Yeah. And then Andrew says, I feel like in the US, we only hear people say handicapped when talking about reserved parking spaces, not when talking about people. That is an excellent point, Andrew, and that's very true. We still have the universal wheelchair sign, and for handicapped spaces, they should probably start rewording that. But I don't know when that change will come
In the
because,
UK, we call it accessible parking or disabled parking. I personally like accessible
oh,
parking
you
because it's
do.
accessible parking.
Yes,
And the thing with
yeah,
bathrooms, like, you
I
know,
can
we
do
hear
that.
people say disabled bathrooms, handicapped bathroom, like it's an accessible bathroom because then it's no, you're not infringing on anyone's identity. Accessible is being able to use something in an equal, equitable way. So it's accessible. So I always opt for the word accessible, even when it comes to the word special education. I'm like,
Mm,
can we not call it accessible education or inclusive
yeah,
education? Because it's putting the
yeah,
word special makes it kind of feel less, more than the norm, or less than the norm. It's like we're just as normal as everybody else. We just have accessible needs, and we need to be included in different ways.
yes. It's all about changing our language from special ed. I know.
Oh,
I
it
don't
makes
even
sense.
know how that started, but it gives me the heebie-jeebies.
Yeah,
Special ed, they should accessible education is much more pleasant, I would say.
I think accessible is
Yeah,
just it's like a satisfying word to say, though. I don't know why. Like
yeah,
accessible. It just rolls off the tongue. Whereas like special, I'd say it and
yeah,
I'm like, oh, I like I don't want to be seen as special. I don't want anyone to be like you're special or you're inspirational or you're XYZ because you're disabled.
yeah,
I want you to tell me that I'm special because I've done something extraordinary and I've earned that title. Not being disabled doesn't earn me anything. It just means I have to work a lot harder to get in through society and fit in.
yeah, definitely. And then Krista says, this was interesting. Thank you both. I have to get on another call. See you soon. Thank you for being here,
Bye.
Krista. Thank you for being
Thank
here and
you.
joining us this morning. And then Dan Williams says, do you think it's time to change the disability sign?
Oh my
Definitely.
goodness, yes, 100%,
Yeah.
100%. Do you know one of the best bathroom signs I seen was last October? So it was an accessible bathroom in Luton Airport, and it's actually in my LinkedIn. And it wasn't a person in a wheelchair; it wasn't a wheelchair user. It was a group of people, all representing both visible and non-visible disabilities. And it said below, "Not all disabilities are visible." And I thought, oh my goodness, every bathroom should have this sign. The problem with the sign of disability and accessible bathroom signs is we are so conditioned as a society to see disability as a wheelchair user. It's a visible difference. And it's because of signs like this. It's so ingrained in us. And will this change happen
Yeah.
overnight where we do suddenly change a sign? Probably not, because there'll be probably debates for years to come. I mean, we can't even get one word language. We can't even accept that everyone's different with a language. We're still fighting about that. I think to get this change, I think that's, again, it's a change in society that'll help people recognize, hold on a second, this disability is more than this here. So maybe people will stop saying, you don't look disabled, because these signs will reinforce, actually, not all disabilities are visible.
Right, right. We just have to change the language and help people see that we're really not so different from other people who just have a different, okay, I don't want to say, different ability. We're born a little bit different than other people. We have different needs. So, like you said, accessibility,
Accessible needs.
yeah, accessibility is much better. So Jamie, I wanted to ask you, you talk a lot on LinkedIn about the inaccessibility of carousels.
Mhm.
Now, do you find that people have, in general, been responsive to this? And I know
Oh.
how people get uncomfortable when we express any anger and frustration over the inaccessibility of things. How do you think people have generally responded to your talking about carousels?
Ooh. So yeah, people don't like to hear that what they're doing is not inclusive. They don't like to hear that they're excluding people. So you're right. People do. They do sometimes have a bit of an attitude. I've had to deal with a lot of that. However, one thing I've learned is I turn everything around, and if like you're being rude to me about content, I actually have photos of me playing a tiny violin for people who'd be ableist to me. Like, I think I've got to the stage in my life, and it's kind of like I take no. I'm not going to say the word, but it's like I take no BS no more. I'm like, I've been disabled enough. I've been discriminated enough. I have been overlooked. I've been excluded enough. I'm done with this. Like the gloves off. I'm done with it. So for me on LinkedIn, like I post a lot of different tips, and some of them receive really well. Like, I've seen a lot more people use accessible hashtags. I've seen more alt text and image descriptions, and I sit and think, this has made one. If one person's doing this, the impact is so far-reaching on LinkedIn. But with carousels, it's like they were the latest feature in 2022, 23, sorry, and I really, really have a problem with them because they're not accessible. And you can make them accessible, but you have to actually put a bit of time into it. You need to check all the contrast. You need to do X, Y, Z. I actually posted a carousel about this week, so if you want to see it, go check my post from yesterday. But with regards to people don't like being told, as I said, things are wrong. So like there has been a lot of people who've came to me and asked me to make them accessible carousels. There's been people who've changed them, but the problem is the big creators, it's the people who have like audiences of 100,000 people, who even
Yeah.
some of them are disabled and they're posting content that isn't accessible. They're posting carousels that's not accessible. So for me, it's like we learn by seeing and doing and interacting. And on LinkedIn, that's where I've learned. That's where I've learned to create my content. If I had seen creators posting accessible carousels, I would have done the same. So now I try to not challenge, but I try to speak to bigger creators to do it. And some of them have started to do it, and some of them just completely ignore you. But if one person sees my post, and this is what I've always said about my accessibility stuff, is if one person sees my post and they make a change from that post, whether that be adding alt text, whether that be reducing emojis, whether that be color contrast, whether it be the language, whatever it is, if they take one thing away from that post, that one thing can impact so many people online. Your message on LinkedIn has the opportunity to blow up, go viral. If somebody sees that and for once they feel included because they can engage with a photo or an image, that you don't know the power that has in somebody. Like as I said, I was excluded my whole life on LinkedIn. Not on LinkedIn, on social media, online. 97 or 98% of the world's top 1 million websites aren't fully accessible. They're not WCAG compliant, and
Mm.
it's like I felt that. So now I think that if one person takes away something from my post, this is amazing because they're going to make help so many people. Even if that's two people, that's still so many people being impacted and the difference. So I'll keep shouting until I'm blue in the face. Accessibility is a never-ending journey. It's just a lot of burnout sometimes, exhaustion, and it's also learning how to keep saying the same message but in new, innovative ways. So, carousels aren't accessible, but if you want to learn how,
Yes.
check out yesterday's post.
Hmm. Yeah. Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, yeah. I get really frustrated, and then I just want to be kind of salty on LinkedIn about
Oh,
it.
I become
Then,
so
you know,
saucy. Like I have. I have come into
So,
conversations and just like they come in like a sauce ball. Like I always tell people, I'm like Miley Cyrus's wrecking ball. I came in like that's me in conversations. If I come into a conversation and I can't engage with it, or there's immature, or there's things I can't engage with, I will tell you. I will probably do it in a polite way. And if you start to sass me, I will sass you straight back and be like, hold on a second. But equally, if it's somebody I've just came across and who maybe doesn't know better, who isn't working within diversity and inclusion or accessibility, I'll message them privately and say, hey, listen, this isn't accessible. But if it's somebody who should know better, somebody who's posting about disability or accessibility, it's like, again, back to my message from earlier, if you work in this space, disabled people is your market. They are your audience. Why are you disabling us whilst talking about being inclusive? That's talking the talk and not walking the walk.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, there's so much to unpack about
Mm-hmm.
accessibility, disability, inclusion. So, Jamie, we are now into over an hour talking,
Oh
and
wow.
I just want to thank you so much for enlightening us with the conversation. And you have said so many things that I hope people watching would take away from here and really think about accessibility. And one important thing that I hope people take away is to always ask the person with the disability what they want to be called. That's the number one. And what other tips can you leave us this today, Jamie?
So my number one tip is go check out my page, Disabled by Society, and add me on LinkedIn. I
Yeah.
give away
Oh, wonderful. Yeah.
yeah, I give away tips honestly, every other day I give away tips around accessibility and
Hmm.
check
Hmm.
me out on there. But if you want to really know how to be accessible, you know, you're never going to get to that point overnight. It's a learning curve. And the best thing to do is to take accountability for accessibility and it's taking account for where you're starting from. You may have no knowledge, you may be halfway there, you may think you're nearly finished, but again, it's just take accountability. Where are you at? How can I improve? Where's my best resources? Follow people who post about accessibility. There's books out there. I'm actually writing one. But there's so much out there that you can use to tap in. But LinkedIn is incredible. You just follow some of the people on here who post about accessibility. Follow yourself. Follow me. Follow Merle Evans. There's so many people posting about accessibility. Learn from lived experience. Don't learn from somebody who doesn't have the lived experience.
Yeah. So that's the first thing is follow Jamie. And then there are many people working in accessibility on LinkedIn, so go ahead and follow them. And of course, follow me.
Yeah.
I focus on accessibility and marketing for brands that care, socially impactful brands. So they are more likely to be interested in disability inclusion. So and also, you can find all of Jamie's links in the post below. So go check him out and go follow him, connect with him. And in the meantime, thank you so much, Jamie, for being here with me this morning.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm so sorry. It was like Alice in Wonderland. I took you down so many rabbit holes.
Oh, not for me. Not for me. Maybe for others, but not so much for me. Thanks a lot. And I will please join me in April when I have my next guest, and that will be a surprise guest. And in the meantime, have a great week, everyone, and I will see you in April. Bye.